They say a woman without a child will borrow one in her prayers. But in this dusty frontier town, one widow didn't have the luxury of praying. Her husband was gone, and his will was clear: no male child, no ranch. If she didn't produce an heir soon, the land would fall into another man's hands. But how was she supposed to do that without a husband? And that's where the real trouble began. The September sun beat down mercilessly on Sagebrush Flats, casting long shadows across the main street, where dust devils danced between the weathered buildings. Varitza Cole stood on the porch of Hartwell's General Store, clutching a crumpled telegram that had arrived 3 days prior. The words burned in her memory. Will contest denied. 1 year from date of husband's death. Male heir required. No exceptions. Judge Morrison. At 28, Varitza had already buried one husband. Ralston Cole had been 43 when consumption took him, leaving behind a modest ranch, 12 head of cattle, and a will that now felt like a noose around her neck. The Cole ranch sprawled across 200 acres of decent grazing land, with a creek running through it and a sturdy 2-room cabin that Ralston had built with his own hands. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was home, and more importantly, it was hers, or would be, if she could meet the impossible condition. Mrs. Cole, the voice belonged to Thatcher Voss, son of the town's only banker. He stepped onto the porch, his polished boots clicking against the worn wood. At 35, Thatcher possessed the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having worked an honest day in his life. His father owned half the businesses in town, and Thatcher had made no secret of his interest in the Cole property. Mr. Voss, Varitza's voice carried the chill of a winter morning. I trust you received word about the will contest. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Unfortunate business, really. My father wanted me to extend an offer. We'd be willing to purchase the ranch at a fair price. Might save you some unpleasantness. Varitza folded the telegram and tucked it into her apron pocket. The ranch isn't for sale. Perhaps not today. Thatcher adjusted his gold watch chain. But come next August, well, that might be a different story. A year goes by mighty quick, Mrs. Cole, especially when a woman's got no prospects. The insult hit its mark. Varitza felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. Good day, Mr. Voss. She turned to leave, but his voice followed her down the street. I'll be around, Mrs. Cole, when you're ready to be reasonable. The 2-mile ride back to the ranch gave Varitza time to think, though her thoughts ran in circles like spooked cattle. Ralston's brother had contested the will from back east, claiming that leaving the ranch to a woman was unnatural and contrary to proper order. The judge had sided with tradition, adding the cruel condition about producing an heir, 1 year to bear a son or lose everything. The ranch house sat quiet in the afternoon heat. Varitza's nearest neighbor was Almeida Rowe, a twice-widowed woman who lived 3 miles south and possessed more practical wisdom than the town preacher and doctor combined. At 42, Almeida had buried 2 husbands, one to a rattlesnake, another to a card game gone wrong, and had no patience for propriety when survival was at stake. Varitza found her hanging laundry behind the house, humming an old hymn while wrestling with a stubborn bedsheet. You look like you've been kicked by a mule, Almeida observed, pinning the sheet to the line with practiced efficiency. What's eating at you? Vanessa explained about the telegram, Thatcher's visit, and the impossible situation. Almeida listened without interruption, her weathered hands never pausing in their work. So let me understand this, Almeida said finally. You need a baby boy within 11 months, or that snake Voss gets your land. That's about the size of it. Almeida hung up the last shirt and turned to face her friend. Well then, darlin', seems to me you don't need a husband. You just need a man who knows what to do and can do it before that banker's boy takes your fence posts. Vanessa nearly dropped the empty laundry basket. Almeida, what? I'm not talking about anything the good Lord didn't design. Almeida's eyes sparkled with mischief. You think every child born in this territory came from a church wedding? Half the women in town were showing before the preacher finished his vows. I couldn't possibly. Could and should are two different things. Almeida picked up the basket and started toward the house. Question is, you want to keep your land or hand it over to that weasel on a silver platter? The next morning found Vanessa and Almeida sitting on the porch of the coal ranch, shelling peas and pretending to discuss the weather. In reality, Almeida was methodically dismantling every one of Vanessa's objections to her scandalous plan. What about my reputation? Vanessa asked, dropping peas into a bowl with unnecessary force. What about your ranch? Almeida countered. Besides, once you've got a baby on your hip and a ring on your finger, folks forget how you got there. They're too busy gossiping about the next scandal. A ring on my finger, you didn't mention marriage. Details, honey. First things first. Almeida paused in her shelling. Look, you can marry the man after if it suits you. Might even be romantic. Nothing like a baby to encourage a proposal. Vanessa felt her cheeks burn. This is madness. Madness is losing your home because you're too proud to bend the rules a little. Almeida's voice softened. Ralston left you that land because he loved you. You think he'd want you to lose it over some fool notion of propriety? The mention of Ralston stung. He'd been a good husband, quiet and steady, who'd married her when she was 25 and already considered a spinster by town standards. They'd tried for children, but it never happened. Now she wondered if it had been his failing rather than hers. Even if I agreed to this insane plan, Vanessa said slowly, how would I even? That's where planning comes in. Almeida set down her bowl and pulled a scrap of paper from her apron. I've been thinking about the men in town. We need someone reliable, healthy, and discreet. Can't have words spreading faster than honey on a hot biscuit. You've made a list. Started one. Almeida squinted at her handwriting. Crawford Boone, the blacksmith, strong as an ox, arms like tree trunks, could probably lift you clean off the ground. Almeida, what? I'm being practical. Then there's Sutton Hale. He's the sheriff. Responsible sort, knows how to keep secrets. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. I can't believe we're discussing this. Foster Grady's another option. He's young, works at the livery stable. Quiet type, probably wouldn't ask too many questions. Stop. Vanessa looked up. Just stop. I need time to think. Almeida folded the paper and tucked it away. Time's one thing you don't have much of, honey. But I'll give you a few days to get used to the idea. Just remember, come next August, you'll either be holding your baby or packing your bags. That evening, Vanessa sat alone on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch stretched out before her, peaceful in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the lonesome sound echoing across the prairie. She thought about Ralston, about the dreams they'd shared of children running through the house, of teaching sons to work cattle and daughters to tend the garden. She thought about Thatcher Voss's smug face and his father's money, waiting to snatch away everything she'd worked to preserve. By the time the first stars appeared, Vanessa had made her decision. 3 days later, Vanessa found herself perched on Almeida's front porch with a cup of lemonade, pretending to enjoy the afternoon while they evaluated prospects. Almeida had expanded her list to include detailed observations about each man's physical attributes, temperament, and likelihood of discretion. Crawford Boone, Almeida announced as the blacksmith walked past on his way to Murphy's saloon. Look at those shoulders. Man could shoe a horse with his bare hands. Vanessa studied the burly blacksmith, noting his impressive physique and steady gait. He seems capable. Of course, there's the smell to consider. Almeida wrinkled her nose. Spends all day around coal smoke and horse sweat. Might take some getting used to. They watched Crawford disappear into the saloon, then turned their attention to Sutton Hale, who was making his afternoon rounds. The sheriff was a serious man in his early 30s, with steel-grey eyes and a moustache he kept precisely trimmed. "Sheriff Hale's got authority," Almeida mused. "Women like a man who can take charge. He's very proper," Vanessa observed, noting how Sutton tipped his hat to every lady he passed. "Probably asks permission before he breathes. Might ask permission for other things too," Almeida said with a wicked grin. "Could put a damper on the whole enterprise." Bridger McCallan rode by on his way to the feed store, dust swirling from his horse's hooves. The rancher owned spread north of town and had a reputation for hard work and harder drinking. "McCallan's got experience," Almeida noted. "Heard he's got children scattered across 3 counties. That's hardly a recommendation for discretion." "Fair point. Man can't keep his breeches buttoned. Probably can't keep his mouth shut either." The afternoon's evaluation continued as various men passed by, each receiving Almeida's colorful commentary and Vanessa's increasingly mortified responses. Dr. Elwood Craven earned points for his gentle hands, but lost them for his advanced age. The preacher's son, Foster Grady, looked promising until Almeida remembered his tendency to faint at the sight of blood. "Imagine him in the birthing room." Almeida laughed. "You'd have 2 patients instead of 1. By the 3rd day of their research, word had begun to spread through town that the 2 widows were up to something. Henderson from the boarding house mentioned to her husband that she'd seen them whispering on the porch, pointing at men like they were judging prize bulls. The story grew with each telling. At Hartwell's general store, 2 ranch wives debated the mystery. "Heard they're planning to start some kind of breeding operation," whispered Mrs. Patterson, leaning across the pickle barrel. "Breeding what?" asked Mrs. Murphy. "Men, apparently. Like they're running a stud farm." The rumors reached ridiculous proportions by Saturday morning. According to saloon gossip, the widows were either starting a male brothel, conducting scientific experiments, or planning to auction off husbands to desperate women from back east. The truth, as rumors often do, became even more scandalous in translation. By Sunday service, half the unmarried men in town were avoiding eye contact with both women, while the married ones found themselves subjected to suspicious questioning from their wives. Mrs. Cole, Preacher Davidson, approached after service, his face grave with concern. "Perhaps we might speak privately about some concerns that have reached my ears." Vanessa felt heat creep up her neck. "Concerns, preacher? There's talk around town. Ungodly talk about activities that would be unseemly for a Christian woman." "I assure you, Preacher Davidson, I've done nothing unseemly." "Perhaps not yet," he replied carefully. "But the devil plants seeds of temptation in fertile ground. A woman alone, with worldly pressures, it's easy to lose one's way." Vanessa left church feeling more humiliated than enlightened. The weight of curious stares and whispered conversations followed her home, where she found Almeida waiting on the porch with a worried expression. "We've got a problem," Almeida announced. Words out. The rumors had indeed taken on a life of their own. By Monday morning, Vanessa could hardly show her face in town without drawing stares and whispered conversations. Her first attempt at discreetly approaching a potential candidate ended in disaster when she cornered Crawford Boone behind his smithy. "Mr. Boone," she began, her carefully rehearsed speech evaporating under his confused stare, "I have a proposition for you." Crawford wiped his hands on his leather apron, leaving black smudges on the worn material. "You need something fixed, Mrs. Cole. Got a horse that needs shoeing?" "No, nothing like that. This is more of a personal matter." The blacksmith's bushy eyebrows rose. "Personal." Vanessa felt her courage failing. The words she'd practiced with Almeida seemed impossible to speak aloud. "I need help with planting." Crawford looked genuinely puzzled. "Ma'am, I work with iron and steel. You want help with crops? You need to talk to old Peterson. He knows all about seeds and soil. Not that kind of planting, Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need help with ensuring my ranch stays in the family. Crawford stared at her for a long moment, then nodded sagely. Ah, I see. You're worried about Thatcher Voss sniffing around your property. Want me to have a word with him? Man like that usually backs down when he meets some resistance. That's not exactly what I... Say no more, Mrs. Cole. Happy to help a neighbor. I'll make sure that Snake knows your land ain't for sale. Before Vanessa could explain, Crawford had returned to his forge, leaving her standing in the dust, feeling more foolish than ever. Her second attempt went even worse. She approached Sutton Hale while he was checking locks on the bank building, hoping the sheriff's reputation for discretion might work in her favor. Sheriff Hale, might I have a word? Sutton touched his hat brim. Course, Mrs. Cole. How can I help you? Vanessa glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. I find myself in a delicate situation. I need assistance from someone trustworthy. Legal troubles. Sutton's expression grew serious. That business with your husband's will? Related to that, yes. You see, the will contains certain requirements that I must fulfill within a specific time frame. Requirements? Vanessa felt her face burning. I need to, that is, the ranch will only remain mine if I can produce. If there's evidence of what, ma'am? An heir, she blurted out. A male heir, within the year. Sutton nodded thoughtfully. That's a tall order for a widow woman. Have you considered remarriage? I've considered alternatives. The sheriff studied her face, and she saw the exact moment understanding dawned in his eyes. His expression shifted from professional concern to scandalized shock. Mrs. Cole, he said carefully, I hope you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything improper, Sheriff. Simply asking for assistance from a man of good character. Sutton took a step backward. Ma'am, I think you'd better speak with Preacher Davidson about this matter. Seems like you need spiritual guidance more than legal help. He tipped his hat and walked away quickly, leaving Vanessa standing alone on the boardwalk with her shame. Word of these encounters spread through town faster than wildfire. By Wednesday, the story had evolved into Vanessa Cole approaching every unmarried man in town with scandalous proposals. The married men began crossing the street to avoid her, while their wives watched from behind curtains with expressions ranging from disapproval to morbid fascination. The final humiliation came when she attempted to speak with Foster Grady at the livery stable. The young man took one look at her approaching figure and promptly climbed into the hayloft, refusing to come down until she left the premises. This is hopeless, Vanessa told Almeida that evening, slumped in a chair with her head in her hands. I've made myself the laughingstock of the entire territory. Nonsense, Almeida replied, though her usual confidence seemed strained. You just need to adjust your approach. My approach. Almeida, I've propositioned half the men in town, and they either don't understand what I'm asking for, or run away like I've got the plague. Then, maybe we've been looking in the wrong places. Vanessa raised her head. What do you mean? Almeida sat down across from her, her expression thoughtful. All this time we've been focusing on men around town, strangers really. What about someone who already cares about you? Someone who'd want to see you keep your ranch? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Almeida's voice was gentle. You're just too blind to see what's right in front of you. Bridger McCallan had worked for the Cole Ranch for 3 years, hired by Ralston just before his health began to fail. At 26, he was younger than most ranch hands, but he possessed an understanding of cattle and land that men twice his age envied. More importantly, he'd stayed on after Ralston's death, when he could have easily found work elsewhere. Vanessa had always appreciated his reliability, but she'd never really looked at him, not the way Almeida was suggesting she should. Bridger was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. His dark hair needed cutting, and he had a habit of looking at the ground when spoken to directly. But there was something solid about him, something dependable. "He's been half in love with you since Ralston hired him," Almeida observed as they watched Bridger repair fence posts near the creek. "Man doesn't stay on a struggling ranch out of loyalty to a dead employer. Don't be ridiculous. He's practically a boy. He's 26, not 16, and he's got more sense in his little finger than most men have in their whole heads." Vanessa studied the young ranch hand as he worked, noting the easy way he moved, the careful attention he paid to each task. Since Ralston's death, Bridger had taken on responsibilities far beyond what his wages justified, fixing whatever needed fixing, tending whatever needed tending, never complaining about the extra work or delayed pay. "Even if what you're saying is true," Vanessa said slowly, "he's an employee. It would be inappropriate. More inappropriate than losing your ranch because you're too proud to ask for help." That evening, Vanessa found herself watching Bridger as he settled the horses for the night. He worked quietly, speaking softly to each animal, checking their water and feed with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. When he finished, he noticed her standing by the corral fence. "Evening, Mrs. Cole," he said, touching his hat brim. "Everything all right?" "Fine, thank you. You worked late. Wanted to check on the mare. She's been favoring her left front hoof." He glanced at the horse in question. "Might need the blacksmith to take a look, but it doesn't seem serious. You take good care of them. They deserve it." Bridger's voice held a warmth reserved for the animals. "A horse that's treated well will carry you anywhere. One that's mistreated won't trust you when it matters most." Vanessa found herself wondering if he was talking about more than horses. "Mr. McCallan, might I ask you something personal?" Bridger's shoulders tensed slightly, but he nodded. "Why did you stay on after Ralston died? You could find work anywhere, probably for better wages." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This place feels like home. Never had that before." He risked a glance at her face. "Didn't want to leave unless you wanted me gone." The simple honesty in his words caught her off guard. "I've never wanted you gone. Good to know." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Ranch wouldn't be the same without you running it." The next day, Almeida arrived with determination written across her weathered features and a basket of fresh bread as an excuse for the visit. "Today's the day," she announced, settling herself at Vanessa's kitchen table. "No more excuses, no more waiting. You're going to talk to that boy. His name is Bridger, and he's not a boy. Even better, shows you're finally seeing him clearly." Almeida cut 2 generous slices of bread and slathered them with butter. "What are you going to say?" "I have no idea. The direct approach has been unsuccessful. Then try the indirect approach. Start with conversation, see how he responds. Feel out his intentions. Feel out his intentions." "Almeida, I can't just..." "You can, and you will, unless you'd rather pack your bags come August." That afternoon, Vanessa found Bridger mending harness leather in the barn, his hands working with practiced precision. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, highlighting the concentration on his face as he worked. "Mr. McCallan." He looked up, setting aside the leather. "Yes, ma'am? I wonder if I might discuss something with you. Something important." Bridger wiped his hands on a rag and gave her his full attention. "Of course." Vanessa had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but facing him now, all her carefully planned words disappeared. "You know about the situation with the ranch, with the will?" "Yes, ma'am. Heard talk in town." "Then you know I'm in a difficult position. I need to, that is, the will requires." She took a deep breath. "I need a male heir within the year, or I lose everything." Bridger nodded slowly. "That's a heavy burden." "Indeed it is." Vanessa twisted her hands in her apron. "The thing is, I've been considering my options, and I find myself in need of assistance." What kind of assistance? The question hung in the air between them. Vanessa felt her courage wavering, but the image of Thatcher Voss's smug face steeled her resolve. "I need a man," she said quietly. "Not a husband necessarily, but a man who could help me meet the requirements of the will." Bridger's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "I see. I know it's unconventional. I know it goes against everything proper society expects, but I can't lose this ranch, Mr. McCallan. It's all I have left of Ralston, all I have in this world." Bridger was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Mrs. Cole, can I ask you something?" "Of course. If you could have anyone help you with this problem, who would you choose?" The question surprised her. I don't know. Someone trustworthy, I suppose. Someone who cares about what happens to the ranch. Someone who cares about what happens to you." The intensity in his voice made her look at him more closely. There was something different in his expression, something vulnerable and hopeful that she'd never seen before. "Yes," she whispered. "Someone who cares about what happens to me." Bridger set down the harness and took a step closer. "Mrs. Cole, Vanessa, I've cared about what happens to you since the day I first laid eyes on you. Been caring about it for 3 years, afraid to say anything, because you were married to a good man who deserved your loyalty." Vanessa's heart began to pound. "Mr. McCallan, Ralston's gone now. God rest his soul, but you're still here, and this ranch is still here, and if you're asking me to help you save both, well, there's nothing in this world I'd be more honored to do." The barn fell silent, except for the sound of horses shifting in their stalls and the distant call of a meadowlark. Vanessa stared at the young man before her, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. The shy ranch hand, the quiet worker who'd stayed loyal through hardship and uncertainty, was offering her everything she needed, and perhaps everything she'd been missing. "Are you certain?" she asked. "The scandal, the gossip, the risk to your reputation." "My reputation can weather whatever storm comes." Bridger reached out tentatively, his fingers barely brushing hers. "Can you?" Vanessa thought of Thatcher Voss, of losing the ranch, of spending the rest of her life as a dependent relative in some distant city. Then she looked at Bridger's honest face, at the call-used hands that had worked tirelessly to maintain her home, at the gentle eyes that had watched over her welfare, without seeking anything in return. "Yes," she said firmly. "I believe it can." 7 months later, spring had given way to summer's full heat, and Vanessa Cole McCallan was 3 days past her due date. She'd married Bridger in a quiet ceremony at Preacher Davidson's house, the same man who had once scolded her for impropriety. Yet even he could not deny the legality of 2 people standing before him in good faith. Almeida and Dr. Craven served as witnesses. Of course, some whispered that the baby arrived a little quick for a July wedding, but most folks decided to let it slide. After all, a healthy heir was worth more than counting months. Now, as July drew to a close and August loomed with its legal deadline, Vanessa felt like she was carrying the weight of the entire territory in her swollen belly. She sat on the porch in the evening heat, fanning herself with Ralston's old hat, while Bridger hovered nearby like a nervous father hen. "Maybe we should ride to town, get the doctor," he suggested for the 3rd time that day. "The baby will come when it's ready," Vanessa replied, though privately she was beginning to worry. The will's deadline was August 15th, just 2 weeks away. Dr. Craven said, "First babies often take their time." Bridger knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her rounded abdomen. "Little one's been mighty quiet today." As if responding to his father's voice, the baby gave a strong kick that made Vanessa gasp. The movement was followed by a tightening sensation across her lower back that had been coming and going all afternoon. "Oh," she breathed, gripping the arms of her chair. "What is it?" Bridger's face went pale. "Is it starting?" Before Vanessa could answer, another wave of pain hit, stronger this time, and lasting longer. When it passed, she found herself looking into her husband's worried eyes. "Yes," she said with a mixture of relief and terror. "I think it's starting." Within an hour, the coal ranch had transformed into a hive of activity. Almeida arrived like a general taking command of a battlefield, issuing orders to anyone within earshot. Dr. Craven followed close behind with his medical bag, his usually calm demeanor showing signs of stress. "Bridger, I need you to boil water," Almeida commanded. "Lots of it. And find every clean sheet in the house." "Is she going to be all right?" Bridger asked, his voice tight with worry. "She's going to be fine, but you're liable to fall over if you don't calm down. When's the last time you ate something?" "I don't remember." "Well, figure it out. Won't do her any good if you collapse from hunger." As word spread through town, neighbors began arriving with offers of help and barely concealed curiosity. The ranch yard filled with wagons and horses as folks gathered to await news. Even Preacher Davidson appeared, mumbling prayers and looking uncomfortable in the face of life's earthier realities. Inside the house, Vanessa labored through the longest night of her life. The pains came in waves, each one stronger than the last, until she felt like she was being torn apart from the inside. Dr. Craven monitored her progress with professional calm, while Almeida provided encouragement and the occasional sharp word when Vanessa threatened to give up. "I can't do this," Vanessa gasped during a particularly difficult contraction. "It's too much." "Yes, you can," Almeida said firmly. "Women have been doing this since Eve, and you're no different. This baby wants to meet the world, and you're the only one who can make that happen." Outside, Bridger paced holes in the porch boards, while the gathered townspeople shared stories and speculation. Crawford Boone had brought his fiddle and was playing soft melodies to pass the time. Sheriff Hale stood with the other men, occasionally checking his pocket watch and announcing the hour. "Been going on for nearly 12 hours, observed Foster Grady. "First babies take their time," replied Dr. Patterson, who'd delivered half the children in the county. "My Martha was in labor for 18 hours with our first boy." Bridger barely heard the conversations swirling around him. Every cry from inside the house sent fresh waves of panic through his system. He'd helped deliver calves and foals, but this was different. This was Vanessa, and he'd never felt so helpless in his life. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, the sounds from inside the house changed. Vanessa's labored breathing gave way to a different kind of effort, and Dr. Craven's voice could be heard giving firm instructions. "That's it, Mrs. McCallan. One more push should do it." The assembled crowd fell silent, every ear straining for some sign of progress. Then, cutting through the morning air like a victory song, came the unmistakable cry of a newborn baby. Almeida burst through the front door like a cannonball, her gray hair wild and her apron stained, but her face radiant with triumph. "It's a boy," she shouted, waving a bloody towel like a battle flag, "and he's got lungs strong enough to chase off every banker this side of the Rockies." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Men threw their hats in the air, women embraced tearfully, and even the normally stoic Sheriff Hale was seen wiping his eyes. Bridger stumbled toward the door on unsteady legs, hardly daring to believe it was over. Inside, he found Vanessa propped up against pillows, exhausted but glowing with accomplishment. In her arms was a red-faced, squalling infant who seemed determined to announce his arrival to the entire territory. "He's perfect," Vanessa whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the loudest voice in 3 counties. Bridger approached the bed slowly, as if walking in a dream. When Vanessa placed the baby in his arms, the infant immediately quieted, as if recognizing his father's touch. "Hello, little man," Bridger murmured, marveling at the tiny fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "Welcome to the coal ranch." The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of approaching horses and raised voices from the yard. Through the window, Bridger could see Thatcher Voss dismounting from a fancy buggy, a leather satchel in his hand and a confident smirk on his face. "Well, well," came Thatcher's voice as he addressed the crowd. "Quite a gathering. I trust the excitement means Mrs. McCallan has delivered?" "That's right," Almeida called from the porch, her voice carrying clearly through the morning air. "A fine, healthy boy, born at 6:30 this morning." Thatcher's smirk faltered slightly. "How fortunate. However, I have business to conclude with the former Mrs. Cole. Legal business that can't wait." He strode toward the house with the arrogance of a man who believed he held all the cards. The crowd parted before him, their earlier celebration giving way to tense silence. Mr. Voss, Dr. Craven emerged from the house, blocking Thatcher's path. "Mrs. McCallan has just given birth. She needs rest, not legal harassment." "This won't take long, Doctor." Thatcher patted his leather satchel. "Just need to serve some papers and clarify a few details about property ownership." "What kind of details?" Sheriff Heir had appeared at Thatcher's shoulder, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "The kind that concern the late Ralston Cole's will and its very specific requirements." Thatcher's confidence was returning. Requirements that may not have been met, despite today's timing. Inside the house, Vanessa heard every word through the open window. The exhaustion of labor was forgotten as cold fear gripped her heart. She looked at Bridger, who was still holding their son with gentle reverence. "What is he talking about?" she whispered. Before Bridger could answer, Thatcher's voice rang out again, louder this time and pitched to carry throughout the assembled crowd. The will states very clearly that the male heir must be legitimate," Thatcher announced with theatrical satisfaction, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Born to a lawfully wedded wife within the prescribed time frame." Bridger's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Almeida appeared at his shoulder like a guardian angel, with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her eyes. "Well now, Thatcher Voss," she called out sweetly, her voice dripping with false concern. "I do hope you brought your reading spectacles, because it seems you might need to examine that marriage certificate we filed 3 weeks after the wedding." Thatcher's confident expression flickered. "Marriage certificate? Filed with the county clerk, witnessed by Dr. Craven and myself, signed by Preacher Davidson." Almeida ticked off each point on her fingers. "All nice and legal, just the way your daddy, the banker, likes his paperwork." Sheriff Heir stepped forward, his hand still resting on his gun belt. "That baby was born to Mrs. Bridger McCallan, née Cole, on July 30th, well within the will's deadline. Unless you're suggesting there's something irregular about the marriage. The timing seems rather convenient," Thatcher sputtered, his earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. "Convenient?" Almeida's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered glass. "Son, are you suggesting that a woman can control when the good Lord decides to bless her with a child? Because if you are, you clearly know even less about the birds and bees than your daddy knows about making honest loans." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. Crawford Boone slapped his knee and declared, "That woman's got more fight than a cornered wildcat." Thatcher's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. "The intent of the will was clearly—" "The intent of the will," Dr. Craven interrupted, emerging from the house with a stern expression, "was to ensure the Cole family line continued. That baby in there is Ralston Cole's legal nephew through marriage, born to Ralston's lawful widow. Unless you've got some objection to the mathematics, I'd say the will's requirements have been met in full. Furthermore," Sheriff Heir added, stepping forward with a steady look, "I checked the will myself. Thatcher, you don't have a leg to stand on. Every word favors the rightful heir." Thatcher's eyes darted to the paper in Heir's hand. "What kind of penalties?" "Oh, nothing too severe," Heir replied with a grin. "Just a fine equal to the full value of the contested property, payable to the rightful heir." The color drained from Thatcher's face faster than water from a punctured bucket. The crowd began to murmur excitedly, sensing blood in the water. "Now hold on," Thatcher protested weakly. I was acting in good faith, protecting my client's interests. Your client? Almeida's voice could have cut steel. Boy, your client is your own greed and your daddy's bank account. That baby in there has more legal right to this ranch than you have to the air you're breathing. Foster Grady, the preacher's son who had once hidden in the hayloft to avoid Vanessa, stepped forward with surprising boldness. Maybe it's time you rode out of here, Mr. Voss. Seems like you've caused enough trouble for one day. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. Men who had spent months watching Thatcher circle the coal ranch like a vulture were clearly enjoying his comeuppance. This isn't over, Thatcher declared, though his voice lacked conviction. There are other legal avenues, son, Dr. Craven interrupted. The only avenue you need to worry about is the one leading out of town. That woman just spent 14 hours bringing new life into this world, and if you disturb her rest with any more of your nonsense, you'll answer to me personally. The crowd parted as Thatcher retreated to his buggy. His shoulders slumped in defeat. As he climbed onto the seat, Almeida called out one final observation. Thatcher, next time you want to challenge a will, maybe try reading it first. Might save you some embarrassment. The laughter that followed could probably be heard in the next county. As Thatcher's buggy disappeared down the dusty road, the celebration resumed with even greater enthusiasm. Someone had brought out a jug of corn whiskey, and Crawford Boone's fiddle playing grew progressively more spirited. The women clustered around the porch, sharing stories of their own childbirth experiences with the kind of graphic detail that made the men retreat to safer topics like cattle prices and weather. Inside the house, Vanessa dozed fitfully while her son slept in the cradle that Bridger had spent weeks crafting by hand. Every few minutes, the new father would tiptoe over to check on both of them, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. "Stop hovering," Vanessa murmured without opening her eyes. "We're not going anywhere." "Sorry," Bridger whispered, settling into the chair beside the bed. "Still feels like a dream. If it's a dream, it's the strangest one I've ever had." Vanessa opened her eyes and smiled at her husband. "Though I have to admit, seeing Thatcher Voss run off with his tail between his legs was worth the wait." Bridger chuckled softly. "Almeida looked ready to skin him alive. Reminded me of a mama bear protecting her cubs. That's exactly what she was doing." Vanessa reached for his hand. "I never could have managed any of this without her." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Almeida appeared in the doorway with a steaming bowl of broth and a satisfied expression. "Thought you might be hungry," she announced, setting the bowl on the bedside table. "Can't nurse a baby on an empty stomach." "How did you know about that clause in the will?" Vanessa asked. "The one about frivolous challenges." Almeida's eyes twinkled with mischief. "I didn't, but Thatcher didn't know that, and Sheriff Hales got a poker face that could fool the devil himself." "You mean you made it up?" "Sometimes a well-timed bluff is worth more than a handful of facts." Almeida smoothed the quilt over Vanessa's legs. "Besides, that boy needed to take down a peg or two. His daddy's been foreclosing on folks left and right, acting like he owns the whole territory." Bridger shook his head in amazement. "You're a dangerous woman, Almeida Rowe." "Honey, I'm a practical woman. There's a difference." She moved to the cradle and peered down at the sleeping baby. "This little one's going to grow up, hearing stories about the day his mama saved the ranch with nothing but determination and a well-timed pregnancy." "Please tell me you won't tell him the details," Vanessa said weakly. "Of course not. Some stories get better with age, like good whiskey. By the time this boy's old enough to understand, the tale will be about his mama's courage in the face of adversity, not about how we went shopping for a daddy like we were picking out a prize bull at market." Bridger nearly choked on his own laughter. "That's exactly what you did. And it worked, didn't it?" Almeida straightened proudly. "Sometimes unconventional problems require unconventional solutions." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Craven appeared in the doorway, his medical bag in hand, and a weary but satisfied expression on his face. "How are we feeling, Mrs. McCallan?" "Tired but grateful," Vanessa replied honestly. "The baby seems healthy as a young colt. Strong lungs, good color, proper weight." "You did fine work." Dr. Craven set down his bag and pulled out a small leather notebook. "Now I'll need some information for the birth certificate." "Full name?" Vanessa and Bridger exchanged glances. In all the excitement and worry, they hadn't discussed names. "Ralston," Vanessa said softly. "Ralston Bridger McCallan." Bridger's eyes widened with surprise and emotion. "After your first husband." "After a good man who loved this ranch," Vanessa corrected gently. "And after another good man who saved it." Dr. Craven scribbled the information in his notebook, then looked up with a slight smile. "Date and time of birth?" "July 30th, 1885, at 6:30 in the morning," Almeida supplied promptly. "And before you ask, Doctor, I checked your pocket watch twice to be sure. Always thorough, Mrs. Rowe." Dr. Craven closed his notebook and stood. "I'll file this with the county clerk next week. That should put an end to any further legal challenges." As the doctor left, the sounds of celebration from outside began to wind down. One by one, the neighbors said their goodbyes and headed home, leaving behind casseroles, baby clothes, and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. Crawford Boone was among the last to leave, approaching the porch where Bridger had emerged, to thank everyone for their support. "That was some excitement," the blacksmith observed, coiling up his fiddle strings. "Haven't seen Thatcher Voss taken down that hard since he tried to cheat at poker and got caught." "Appreciate you staying," Bridger replied. "It means a lot to have neighbors willing to stand with us." "Hell, boy, after watching you work that ranch for 3 years without complaint, we all knew you belonged here. It just took you a while to figure it out yourself." Crawford grinned. "Besides, Vanessa's always been a good person. About time she had some happiness come her way." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Bridger found himself alone on the porch with his thoughts. The events of the day felt surreal. The birth of his son, the confrontation with Thatcher, the realization that his family was safe and secure. Almeida joined him, settling into the rocking chair with a contented sigh. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. "Just thinking about how different everything is from this morning," Bridger replied. "This time yesterday, I was just the hired help. Now I'm a husband and father with a ranch to run." "You were never just hired help," Almeida corrected. "You were family from the day you decided to stay and fight for this place. The rest was just paperwork." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of evening settling over the ranch. Cattle lowed in the distance, horses shuffled in the corral, and somewhere a coyote called to its mate. "Almeida," Bridger said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "When you first suggested the plan, did you know it would work out this way? With Vanessa and me, I mean." Almeida was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with memory. "That first day you started working here, I watched you watching her, saw how careful you were around her, how you'd find excuses to check on her welfare, saw how she relaxed when you were near, even if she didn't realize it herself. You could see all that. Honey, I've been married twice and buried both husbands. I know what love looks like, even when the people feeling it are too stubborn or scared to admit it." Almeida rocked gently in her chair. "That whole business about finding a man to solve her problem, that was just an excuse to push you two together." Bridger stared at her in amazement. "You manipulated us. I gave you an opportunity. What you did with it was up to you." Almeida's eyes twinkled with satisfied mischief. "Though I have to admit, watching you stumble through that proposal was better entertainment than a traveling medicine show. What if it hadn't worked? What if she'd chosen someone else? Then I would have found another way to open your fool's eyes." Almeida reached over and patted his arm. "Some people are meant to be together, Bridger. They just need a little help figuring it out. The front door opened softly, and Vernissa emerged, moving carefully but under her own power. She changed into a clean dress and fixed her hair, though exhaustion was still evident in her movements. "What are you two conspiring about now?" she asked, settling into the chair beside her husband. "Just discussing the fine art of matchmaking," Almeida replied innocently. "Oh, Lord." Vernissa shook her head. "Please tell me you're not planning to inflict your help on anyone else." "Well, now that you mention it, Sheriff Hale's been looking mighty lonely lately. And that new school teacher who arrived last month seems like she could use some masculine companionship. Almeida Rowe, you are incorrigible." "Thank you, dear. I consider that high praise." As if responding to the sound of his mother's voice, baby Ralston began to fuss from inside the house. Vernissa started to rise, but Bridger was already on his feet. "I'll get him," he said softly. "You rest." Vernissa watched her husband disappear into the house, then turned to Almeida with tears in her eyes. "How did you know?" she whispered. "How did you know he was the right one? Because he was the only man in 3 counties who saw you as more than just a woman who needed rescuing." Almeida replied simply, "He saw you as someone worth saving, worth staying for, worth loving. The rest was just details." Bridger returned with the baby, who had quieted as soon as he felt his father's steady hands. The little family sat together on the porch as evening deepened into night, watching the first stars appear in the vast western sky. "What happens now?" Vernissa asked, her voice soft with wonder. "Now we raise this boy," Bridger replied, gently rocking his son. "We work the ranch, pay our debts, and prove that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places." And Almeida added with a grin, "We give this town something to talk about for the next 20 years. By the time little Ralston here is grown, the story of how his parents got together will be legend from here to San Antonio." Vernissa laughed, imagining the tales that would grow with each telling. What will they say? Oh, the usual nonsense. How the widow Cole held auditions for a husband like she was casting players for a traveling theater. How she interviewed every eligible man in the territory and found them all wanting, except for the shy cowboy who'd been right under her nose all along. "That's not entirely inaccurate," Bridger observed. "The best legends never are." Almeida stood and stretched, her work finally done. "Well, children, I believe I'll head home and let you 3 get acquainted properly. But don't think this means I'm done meddling in your lives. Someone's got to make sure you name the next baby after me." "The next baby?" Vanessa's voice rose an octave. "Oh, honey, you don't think little Ralston's going to be an only child, do you? This ranch needs at least 3 or 4 young ones running around to make it feel properly alive." As Almeida disappeared into the darkness, her laughter floating back on the evening breeze, Vanessa turned to her husband with a mixture of horror and amusement. "Please tell me she's not serious about the naming. With Almeida you never can tell," Bridger replied, shifting the baby to his shoulder. "But I figure we've got at least 9 months to worry about it." 9 months? Well, Bridger said with a grin that made him look younger than his years. "Like the lady said, this ranch needs young ones running around. And I'm thinking little Ralston here might enjoy having a brother or sister to play with." Under the vast canopy of stars, with their newborn son sleeping peacefully between them and their hard-won ranch, stretching out in all directions, Vanessa Cole McCallan realized that sometimes the most scandalous beginnings could lead to the most perfect endings. And in the years to come, whenever anyone asked about the famous romance of Sagebrush Flats, they would smile and say it all started with a desperate woman, a wise friend, and the simple truth that love sometimes needs a little help finding its way home. The legend of the widow's gamble was born that night, destined to be retold around campfires and in saloons for generations. But for the 3 people on that porch, 4, counting the baby, it wasn't legendary at all. It was simply the beginning of the rest of their lives.